Right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying your lunch. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club for one of our increasing number of lunchtime events. It's great to have you all back here. Before we start, I'll just advise you of what the next event is, which is this coming Thursday. It's a book talk by Mr. Liu Hongxing entitled "The World Is Not Like This." The speaker, Hong Kong-born photojournalist. He was the first Time magazine photojournalist posted to Beijing since 1978. He's produced a remarkable book which really documents, I suppose, most of our lifetimes. So that's definitely worth coming to, and that's on this Thursday, and places are available. Well, on to today's event, and I'm delighted to welcome back a regular speaker here, Matthew Marsh. Matthew, as you all know, sort of pillar of the Hong Kong, an Asian motorsport scene. Former driver, winner of the Carrera Cup Asia Championship way back. That's almost 20 years ago, Matthew, which is really dating you.
Almost 20 years.
Almost, yes, okay. And then, of course, well known as a broadcaster in Hong Kong and throughout Asia, and also as at the sharp end of the commercial world of motorsport, in terms of actually developing new partnerships, introducing new sponsors, and which is obviously an incredibly exciting time to be in, with the remarkable growth in Formula One and both throughout the world since Bernie stepped down. But we're going to start off. Let's just wind back. The last time you were here was in August last year. We just had Silverstone, Hamilton and Verstappen, gloves came off, and it just intensified throughout the summer and culminated in Abu Dhabi with quite a controversial finish. If you're Dutch, you think it was totally justified and a perfect end and an elevation of the man who has single-handedly saved probably not just Formula One, but probably the world.
I've got to have a sip of this because I'm being taken back to a moment of intense distress.
Exactly. And then again, sort of Hamilton deposed, 7 years at the top. What was the mood amongst the people inside the sport, in the press room? I remember your post-race show. It was just sort of everybody sitting there open-mouthed. How was it?
Well, exactly. I mean, the post-race show on the Go F1 show, we had James Allen, who had been the commentator for what I thought was the most dramatic final moments of a Grand Prix, which was when Lewis Hamilton won the championship in 2008. And if you remember the final corner, I think, of the final lap. And of course, so I thought, James, it'd be great. And of course, as usual, I was wrong about that because we were about to see something even more dramatic, which didn't really ever get settled, did it? I mean, the debate went on into the winter. I thought it was a travesty because if we consider the races with the two of them finished, 5,500 kilometres of racing between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, and if you add up the times, which somebody else did, obviously, not me, 9 seconds between the two of them, which is remarkable over 5,500 kilometres. And yet, what we remember is not that. We remember this ridiculous situation in Abu Dhabi where the race director chose not to follow the rules, not only as written, but as previously used. And so that was the bad news. I think the good news was that Max Verstappen is a very worthy champion, and there's no doubt about that. He led 51% of the laps, which obviously means more than everybody else combined. He led twice as many laps as Lewis. I thought he behaved in a belligerent way, shall we say, at times, which cost him he should have been leading the championship easily, should have won it easily, but he didn't because of some of his own actions and some bad luck. Baku, of course, this weekend was a good example of when he lost lots of points. But he's a worthy champion, so there's no doubt about that. Equally, Lewis did an amazing job and had won it, basically. And it gave him an opportunity, didn't it, to behave with grace in the face of adversity. So I think most people came away thinking, how on earth did that happen? Because it's ridiculous. But as I said, the champion is a good champion. There's no doubt about that. I think my final point on this, for now, until I think of another one, is that if this was a shipping company or an airline, Formula One, and an executive had created such a disastrous decision as to run a ship aground, for example, or another disaster. That person, we'd know that person's name as we do with Michael Massey, but we'd also know the name of the CEO because he would have stepped down to take responsibility for putting an executive in a position, which Michael Massey was in, where the guy was, if you watch this an interview he did with Sky on the Friday or the Saturday of Abu Dhabi, and Nikki will know about this, you could see the guy was stressed out and exhausted, and hardly surprising. And I think that the governing body of the sport and Formula One should have taken responsibility for putting him in a position which was probably quite obvious to people that were thinking about it, should have been thinking about it, that he was going to make a mistake in the...
Would Charlie Whiting have done the same thing?
Probably not, because I think, bless him, Charlie Whiting, of course, passed away almost 3 years away now. 3 years ago now. The difference, I think, was I don't think Michael Massey on purpose manipulated the race, to use Lewis's expression. I don't want to believe he did it on purpose. I don't want to believe that he favoured one over the other. But I think he was... So let's put that on the I'm not sure part, and I don't really want to think about that, because that's... But I think he was trying to be clever. I think he was trying to come up with a really dramatic finish. And I think, certainly in my own experience, when I'm trying to be clever, usually ends in disaster. As you know very well, I've been paid for a couple of those disasters.
Well, thanks. I mean,
Sorry.
I'd like to offer you a directorship of my shipping company, actually, in the back of that. Now, OK, so let's move on from that. This year, 7 races down. What's been the biggest surprise for you?
You asked me this question the other day at the bar. What was the answer? Mercedes. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why it's Mercedes. Because pre-season, a couple of people at Mercedes who I'd spoken to said, we're going to do really well. The car looks amazing. And the car does look amazing, doesn't it? I mean, we've all seen it. It looks really fast. There's a problem between the correlation between how good it looks and how fast it actually is. So I think I'm really surprised by that.
You know, have these new cars, I mean, this is a new set of regulations. In your opinion, has it actually improved the racing?
I think, no doubt, really. I mean, for those that don't know, the shift in the regulation for 2022 was designed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For the first time in a long, long time, the regulations were thinking ahead and saying, right, 3 or 4 or 5 years probably out, what do we need to solve? And the biggest problem that Formula One has had is not exactly the lack of overtaking, but the lack of being able to get to a point where you could make an overtaking maneuver. And because the cars are so aerodynamically optimized, if you're behind another car and you get within, it used to be, didn't it, 3 seconds, you started to find that. So unless you were 2 seconds a lap faster than the car ahead, you were never going to get to within a second of that car. So that was the problem they were trying to overcome. And very simplistically, what Formula One did, and they have to be credited for this, and this is also, you know, I'm a massive Bernie Ecclestone fan for all the things that we love about Bernie. The one-liners. Actually, not even one-liners, like the three-worders, you know? He says more in 3 words than some do in paragraphs, as I'm now proving. But what they basically did with Formula One was they went from, it's all about the top surface of the car, providing the downforce, which, of course, if the air is then disrupted by the car ahead and becomes turbulent, that top surface is not working very well. So let's make it about the floor of the car, which is less disturbed, less affected by disturbed air ahead. And it's worked really well. I mean, we can see that, can't we? We can see the way the cars can follow closely and get to within striking distance. We're seeing lots of overtaking. So
George Russell says it's destroying his spine.
Well, that's the unintended consequence, isn't it? That we have the porpoising phenomenon where, because now the cars are what they call ground effect cars, because it's so much of the downforce. It used to be 60% of the downforce was from the floor. That's when the floor was flat. It'd be mandated to be flat because they didn't want so much downforce from the cars, right? Now they can create these Venturi tunnels like a wing upside down on the bottom side of the car. That's about as much as I understand of it, and I hope it sounded impressive. The problem they've got now is that they're generating so much downforce on the Mercedes car that it's sucking to the ground. It gets to a certain point, and the cars that are working well, the wing starts to stall as it approaches the point of getting to the floor. So what I'm trying to, how do I say this? There's a kind of diminishing returns on downforce such that they never hit the floor or get to a point where the wing stalls suddenly. The Mercedes car is stalling suddenly, and I think it goes back to this earlier point of they have so much downforce potential on that car, they kind of don't know how to control it. I think that's basically...
So the ability was too good.
Well, yeah, but there's also another point on this, which is they had no reference point. Every other year, it's you're evolving a design, aren't you? I was listening to Mario Isola of Pirelli Tyres yesterday, talking about why is it, I'm jumping topics here, but why is it that you're having to run the tyres at the same high pressures that you were the last few seasons? Because the problem with running high tyre pressures is the tyres tend to overheat, and that's why the drivers have to manage the tyres in the race rather than just go flat out, right? So what we were all hoping was, with these new tyres around the 18-inch rims, because they went from 13 to 18-inch rims, with a new construction, with some time again to plan ahead, they could go back to some more reasonable tyre pressures, the drivers could drive flat out, which is what we all want to see, right? And the problem is they've had to very quickly go back to those higher tyre pressures they were using before to keep the integrity of the tyre. Why? Because the cars aren't any slower than they were last year. And they were expecting them to be 3 seconds a lap slower. So I think I'm kind of going round full circle, and it was a long circle.
It was indeed.
I think the problem that Mercedes might have had was that they were thinking everybody's going to be 3 seconds off the pace, but we're only a second off the pace, because they didn't realise how everybody else had also found the performance back in the cars, basically.
I mean...
What was the question?
Well, actually, following on from that, are Ferrari going to drop the ball again? Like they usually do?
Gosh. So we used to have this thing here where we'd say, who's a Hamilton fan and who's a Verstappen fan, right? So who's a Ferrari fan? And I'll put my hand up because they go up very quickly. Everybody's a Ferrari fan, you're right, to some degree, right? Good. Well done.
Do you think they'll pull it off? I mean, they did a pretty good job of losing Monaco. Oh, so you're with me on that. Okay, fine. Well, then let's move on. Talking about drivers. I mean, you've previously been here and you talked about how mega you think Lando Norris and George Russell are, but did you expect them to eclipse their illustrious teammates this year as much as they have done? And does this mean that they are just more capable of adjusting to these new cars, and the old boys, they're sort of stuck in their sort of first decade of this century? And
who are the old boys?
People like Hamilton and Ricciardo. I mean, who are young enough to be my children.
That's what, 37, I think now. Okay, the elephant in the room is the Lewis Hamilton, George Russell thing, right? So I think I'm right in saying that Lewis hasn't finished ahead of George since the season opener.
Yeah.
But like every piece of data, if you actually drill into it, there's various circumstances. I mean, Imola was the one, wasn't it, where George, I think, finished 4th or 5th, and Lewis was outside the points, was 10th, yeah. So, but if you actually looked at it, Lewis was on the wrong side of the grid. He was on the slippery side. That meant that at the first corner, George actually took a couple of places, and he got out of the danger zone, and Lewis was in the danger zone. And then I think probably at that point, Lewis was in the danger zone and thinking, do I really want to have a crash? Or is it kind of expected I'm not going to do much from this position? Maybe. But then we saw that also in Barcelona, didn't we, where he got knocked off by Kevin Magnussen at the beginning. And I was watching the lap times, and he got on the radio, that famous thing where he said, we ought to save the engine, guys. And he was obviously thinking about taking an early flight home. But for about 2 laps, and then the lap times, he got himself together. Whether again, I don't know from the lap times whether that's him grumpy or that's him thinking, let's take care of the tyres. But what I do know is that from then on, he was fast. And I think you'd be very foolish to underestimate Lewis.
Think he'll bag a couple of winners this year?
Depends on the car. But I think that the problem that I'm going to jump slightly on this one, but the George Russell Lewis Hamilton situation is related to the Daniel Ricciardo situation, which is I don't think there's anything wrong with Daniel Ricciardo, except for Lando Norris, which is that I think Lando Norris is absolutely mega. I think he's at least as good as George Russell, and I think he's probably, I don't know, I think he might be quicker than George Russell, which most people don't think, right? Because he hasn't been that guy, which is bizarre, really, because he should be. He won Formula 3, he came second in Formula 2, didn't he, to Russell. I just think because he's the friendly, smiley, chappy, whereas George is the looks straight down the barrel of the camera and says this, and because Lando's been in a McLaren. We kind of think the McLaren's a pretty good car, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually, 2/10 down the road, which is where Daniel's driving it to. And unfortunately, as before when he had Max Verstappen as a teammate, he's now got Lando Norris as a teammate, and it's going to bring his career to an end. I think that's what I would do. That's what I'd put.
Do you think he's going to do what he did with Verstappen and sort of run away and take the bucks?
Apart from the take the bucks part.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's had his big paydays.
We see it all the time, don't we? We see drivers. So on the TV I did with Fox for many years, those of you who did watch Fox, by the way?
Yeah.
Only half of you, okay.
Most of your audience.
Okay. Alex Young has been my sparring partner on that. And the biggest problem that Alex Young had in his Formula One career were two people, Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso. One is a double world champion and one is a multi-race winning driver. And at the time when he was racing in Formula One, people thought Alex was a bit crap in the F1 context because he was at the back of the grid, by the way, driving the worst car. Right? And often, by the way, not only driving the worst car, but driving the worst of the two worst cars. Because they would understandably give the better parts to the guy who was a little bit faster than him. But the reality is Alex was a seriously good racing driver, and had he been in the equivalent of a Mercedes or a Red Bull or whatever, or as we've seen with Zhou Guanyu this year in an Alfa Romeo, he'd have been in the top 10, right? So, but we didn't know how good Alex Young was, but we didn't know how good Fernando Alonso and Mark Webber were, and that was really detrimental to Alex's career because that kind of stain on his reputation is very hard to wash off, and it's unfair, but it's the reality of the sport, unfortunately.
Now, we recently had the Monaco Grand Prix. We got Baku coming up. Monaco, 20 best drivers in the world, tyres are extreme wets, and they don't want to go out and play. Bit of a damp squib. What does the man in the street think? Should it have gone ahead? And also, just the Monaco issue as a whole. I mean, is Monaco now finished?
Yeah. Who's been to Monaco? I'm name dropping there. We all are. Okay, well, when did that? Who's been to Baku? Who's been to Macau?
Yeah.
There you go. Monaco, Macau.
I'll take Macau any day.
Let me tell you about Baku, but that's another day. I think we all did. Those of us that were watching the Grand Prix were thinking, come along. Because actually, we were hoping that would happen, that the rain would come and it would happen kind of last minute. And it would, because when things happen at the last minute, all the preparation, and if you like, the preparation curve is generally those who have the most resources are the best prepared. And so when something happens at the last minute, like rain, that isn't necessarily expected or comes from the wrong direction or whatever it is, maybe Alex Albon might do particularly well here, or the AlphaTauris, and to some degree in the race Pierre Gasly proved that, right? Because he came from nowhere on the grid to doing quite well.
Were you there in 1972?
72, let me think when I don't know if was I born in 72, okay. Tim? I don't know.
Exactly the same thing happened. Last ever win for BRM.
There you go. Yeah. Were you there in 72?
Yeah.
You weren't in 72.
No, I was watching on television. I was at prep school.
That's a good journalist, you see, because the person I was interviewing said yes, and then when I said you weren't, I had to admit that, in fact, he was watching it on television.
Same thing these days.
It's not the same thing these days.
Anyhow, right, well, now going on to what F1 is today.
We've completely skipped the answer to that question.
Well, OK, do you want to finish answering?
I think we all agree that the race should have started on time, but we can understand sort of why it didn't. I don't know if you know, that the reason it didn't start on time was not, there was a storm coming and they were worried about that. But actually also what happened was, after delaying it for the storm coming, as I understand it, I wasn't there, but as I've read and heard, the water affected the electricity system and it caused the start light gantry to be unreliable. And what they were then concerned about was, if we start the race now, maybe the start lights don't work and that could cause an accident. And then further than that, well, that's why they delayed the start, and then they start behind the safety car because some of the track is wet and some of it's dry and blah, blah, blah. And I think, well, there's too much of that stuff. And we waited for an hour to watch our Grand Prix. And many people didn't. Many people turned the TV off and went about their business. Exactly. I would have done the same, but I had a show to do later on, so I had to watch it.
Now, Bloomberg said around the time of the Miami Grand Prix, the posh, stodgy European sport has been transformed for the US with a hit Netflix series, race car drivers on Twitch, and a Miami meets Vegas overhaul, and it's working. Bernie Ecclestone said, they're producing Formula One American style. It may well be that it's good because so many stupid things come out of America and everyone's happy, but it wasn't the way I ran things. Bigger audience, share prices tripled, more people want to be involved. Talking earlier, can't get tickets to any race anywhere now. But is it losing its traditional heartland? Is it becoming too bling?
This is a very good point, because actually when that whole thing was happening with the Grand Prix being delayed, I did a poll on Twitter, Matthew Marsh F1, by the way, for those that care. And I said, would this be happening if Bernie was in charge? And I said yes, and that got 21%. No, don't be ridiculous, got 80%. And I texted it to Bernie, just saying, for your amusement, which of course he didn't reply to because he doesn't know who I am. But anyway, that's another point. But the point is, if Bernie had been running Formula One, then Monaco Grand Prix would have started on time. So there you go. And also another thing happened. If Bernie had been running Formula One, I'm going to go on to how I'm a massive fan of Liberty, and I think I said here last year that I thought Chase Carey was Man of the Year and underestimated massively. But there is the massive growth of Formula One, but there's been a big splodge on the page, where I've got that metaphor from, but which is the Miami Grand Prix. People paid huge sums to be in the Paddock Club, and it was crap. And it was crap because, like any business that's over-expanding, sometimes they make mistakes, and they were desperate to have a Grand Prix in Miami, and they allowed the people that run the stadium to run the hospitality. Now, Singapore Grand Prix runs the hospitality. What could go wrong? The difference was BS-ONG would not allow it to be crap. BS-ONG has taken the level of hospitality at a Grand Prix from what it was, which was pretty impressive, to mind-blowing. And if you ever want to do a bucket list thing and you got 10,000 US or something to spend, plus obviously your friend, and I'm available, and Tim probably is too, having recovered from the 72 Monaco Grand Prix, as we now know, it's a brilliant thing. And you go there for all 3 days, and you get there as soon as it opens, and you get kicked out at the closing time. It's brilliant. But Miami didn't do that. And I've talked to people who said, I was asking for cutlery, and I've had only a knife, and I was asking for a Diet Coke, and it came in a champagne glass, which I don't know if it's supposed to come in a champagne glass. No, and that's a problem, right? So, what was the question?
But is Formula One losing its traditional heartland of the people who just wanted to go to Monza and Silverstone, or is it a case of it doesn't matter anymore? You've got this new bunch of people. It's seismic shift to a new market. I mean, it's interesting what you say about Miami, and it costs a fortune. But Bernie, of course, he always said, well, unless you can afford to buy a Rolex, I don't want you there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about your earlier point, which is, does it matter? I think it does. I think it does matter if people don't have easy access to Formula One, and I think easy access is television. And I do think it's problematic that Formula One increasingly has been not available free to air, because I think most people who are now at my age probably had their first almost certainly because of pay TV wasn't around, but we got to see Formula One because it was on at home and you watched it, and that's a problem.
I mean, but the sport is booming. I mean, your day job is actually attracting new investment into Formula One, new partners, new sponsors.
Yeah.
I mean, and the rate card. I mean, people are charging a lot more for Formula One sponsorship. So what are you selling when you're selling it to a company, and what do they get when they actually do a deal with you? Because you're not necessarily doing the title sponsorship deals.
Well, it might be.
Well, you will be. I know. I mean, we're going to start somewhere.
My biggest fan here. So yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time talking to brands about the value of motorsport, not only Formula One, but Formula E and Macau Grand Prix and other NASCAR and MotoGP and so on. Formula One is the one that we often gravitate towards because everybody understands it, and because actually, frankly, in a value for money sense, if you're going to spend over a certain amount, actually, basically, you get so much from Formula One, and you get these 22 races on not every continent, but so many countries you can activate locally. To your point about the sponsorship, we've seen companies that I never thought would come into Formula One, like Google, Salesforce maybe, but Google, Salesforce, Oracle, all the crypto companies, or not all of them, but the big ones, most of the big ones. They have tended to go with the top three plus McLaren. Top three, yeah, obvious. McLaren, amazing marketing machine. So that's great. And I've had put together a few deals this year with other teams, most of the time, because actually what I say to brands is that I think, of course, the number of eyeballs has gone up. TV audience in the USA has almost doubled and so on, right? But is TV audience really the most valuable thing about Formula One? I don't think so. I mean, it was in the 1980s. If you were a cigarette brand and you wanted to buy a single global advertising platform for the world, it was hugely efficient. But today, I mean, I don't know how many of you here are marketers, but you know where your audience is most of the day, and you can get to them in a really efficient way. So what you want is a story to tell. And so I think a lot of these brands, I look at it and think, well, I'm annoyed I missed that deal. Of course I am. Bybit have spent 30 million US a year to be on the red board. Does anybody know what Bybit does? I mean, I happen to know because I was so annoyed, right? But the point is that they're not actually telling their story, and they could tell their story. They could spend $5 million on a partnership, and it doesn't matter which Formula One team that's with, because the association with Formula One, for me anyway, I'm completely wrong about this, because everybody else is spending hundreds of millions of dollars doing it the other way. But to me, the value in F1 is, if you put your brand next to Formula One, you get 80% of the value for 20% of the cost, basically.
So you don't have to be winning?
Absolutely, no, because the stories you tell around Formula One are around constant innovation, teamwork, technological advance, da-da-da-da-da. And yeah, of course, if it's a Williams deal, it's less impressive than if it's a Mercedes deal. But I think most of the time, the reason people do deals with Mercedes rather than Williams is because they want to hang out in the Mercedes garage. And I understand it, but that's not actually probably on a metric of a marketing deck, is it? I should also say the other reason probably is that Williams keeps saying no to deals. I've had now, I don't know, I was totting up. I think I'm now at 20 million euros of turned down deals from Williams. And I've just realized this is going live on Facebook. Whatever, it's true. I don't know what's going on with that team, but I keep ringing them and saying, I've got this deal, and they keep saying no. Maybe it's me.
Yeah. Could be. So, in the 70s and 80s, we had this period where big tobacco came in. Remember then, pre-financial crisis, every team seemed to be sponsored by a bank. And they all seemed to go in the blink of an eye. And now it's all crypto.
Well, yeah, same thing. I had a crypto company lined up, wanting to do a deal. And then the market crashed. Kind of. It went. I think you're still up if you bought 2 years ago, right? I'm not sure, right? Okay, crash. It's not 1929, is it? It's not 1986, is it? You know what I mean? And we have to be conservative now. And I wanted to say, what would you have done if you had signed this a week ago? Did you not expect it to crash? Did you not crash? Sorry. Did you not expect it to correct? So a few people have said to me, are they going to be able to pay their bills? And I suspect the top ones, FTX, Crypto.com, Bybit, Binance are in there. Actually the numbers we're talking about, 20, 30 million US a year, they've probably got it in the bank. I guess so.
You've now established your own television channel. Broadcasting presence, with the Go F1 show, which is a real must-watch if you want to know something about the background of what's going on in F1, broadcast around the time of every race. And you've got on YouTube and various other social media. I mean, it's definitely worth checking out because you're actually really accessing some interesting people who give a background story that I find you don't normally get when you're watching the mainstream broadcasters. I mean, that must have been quite an undertaking to put all of that together and to get it going. What's it been like, and where do you see it actually going to?
It's been great, actually. And the first, who's actually seen the show? Obviously, I have. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. And for those of you that haven't, thanks. Right? I don't get a take on the food here, by the way, just as a matter of, so that you know. I'm here to promote the show. So it's called the Go F1 Show, and you can access it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, of course, I talk about Twitter, and gof1.tv is our website. And it's totally free of charge, right? That's that bargain basement price. So when Fox closed, there's a chap at Twitter, used to be at Twitter, called Maurizio Barbieri. He's in Singapore. And he rang me and he said, create your own show. We'll do it. We'll put it on Twitter. You can stream it. And we'll promote it. It'll be great. What are people in Asia going to have after Fox closed? Because as you might know, Fox had the rights, And out of Singapore, they took the live action from Formula One and they topped and tailed it. And then they sold that on to Now TV in Hong Kong and True in Thailand and so on, Singtel, and so forth. And then when they, rather suddenly, because it was mid-contract, decided they weren't going to carry on, they put Formula One in a really difficult position because it's a small, very small and efficient team of people at F1. And they now had to deal with somebody at Now TV and somebody at Singtel and so on and so on and so on. And basically their job, which they did very well, was to keep the lights on. Because we almost had a situation in Asia last year, had Ian Holmes at F1 not been as pragmatic as he was, that we wouldn't have seen the final 7 races of the most dramatic F1 season. So Ian Holmes gets a big thumbs up for that. So it's on all the channels. But of course, the difference was he didn't have, I imagine, the leverage to say to them, but you must do a post-race chat show. Because they were like, well, we'll put the show on, but we're not going to get any more extra subscribers. So blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Twitter called and said, why don't you do the show? And I thought, this is a really good time to do this because there's a bunch of people who've been laid off at Fox who are really talented people who know Formula One. And I know them because I've been working with them for some years. Alex is keen as mustard to do something together. Let's do it. And we were so on the case and professional that when we did our first show, the stream ended mid-sentence because I had programmed it wrongly in Twitter. So the good news was people tweeted and said, what happened? So some people were watching. 2. My wife was 1. You know. But then actually it's like, okay, what else can we learn from this? And what we've learned from it basically is, unlike with the Fox show, which had to start after the podium and had to finish probably at the hour because there was a tennis match or something. And so sometimes our shows were 45 minutes and we were, what are we going to talk about? And sometimes they were 14 minutes and we were struggling to cope, right? Our show, we can run as long as we want, but if we don't, we do 45 minutes. And the other thing is, you can watch it live, but you don't have to. You can watch it on demand, which you couldn't do with Fox. So it's on, as I say, YouTube and so on and so on. And then the other thing is, we discovered, last year we were doing some races at, 4 in the morning, which were the best one in the world, and even going to bed in the afternoon. As we know, Bill, you know this. You're not at your best at 4 in the morning, mate. I'm sorry, but it's true. And so we said this year, for the, what was the Grand Prix we had earlier in the year? It was like that. Miami. Let's do it on a Monday night. And somebody said, but can you do that? And I said, it's my show, so we'll do it on Monday night. But I'm being flippant, but actually the thing was, the point about our show also is we have audience interaction. So on Twitter, people send us questions, send us comments. We ask them to give us questions. And when people send us questions, we put it up on the screen. And we've got this idea for later in the year, we're working on it technically, where we actually want to have an audience that's online with our partner Cisco WebEx by Cisco, that they're going to be watching the show, if you like, on a video call with us, and then they'll ask questions, which we can do. But when we were at Fox, we couldn't do that because we were a TV station. So
you've got a small team of people you put together for this, none of whom you've actually seen.
Yeah, it's basically. A lot of them I hadn't, 2 or 3 of them I'd met. But there's the other thing. In the TV world, I'm in the makeup room, and there's these people, and nobody ever introduced you, and I knew kind of knew some people. I didn't really know many of them. For 2 years, I think we were working from home, and people changed. And luckily, there's a guy called Raushan, who I worked with. We went on the road for 2 years at Fox, days before the pandemic. And I rang him and said, who do we need? And he said, well, we know Hoffman is totally mega. Hoffman is a Hong Kong Chinese guy who's living in Singapore. He's the guy, by the way, Bill, who you do text at 4 in the morning, and he says, on it, and 45 minutes later, you get an edited package of an interview you've just done. So there's brilliant people out there. And one more thing I want to add to that is, the other thing we had at Fox, because I used to be complaining all the time. I must have been really hard to work with. I know it's difficult to believe. But I was always moaning about, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Why don't we have this guy? And often it was the rules. And one of the rules, I think I'm right in saying, if you're an F1 rights holder is, within the show that you have, you're only allowed to, I think Formula 2 you can talk about for this many seconds. And IndyCar you certainly can't, and da-da-da. But again, we can, and I think people actually are quite interested to know who is Colton Herter, the young American who people keep talking about. Let's have an interview with Colton. We couldn't have done that probably on Fox. The Formula 2 driver, Jahan Daruvala from India, really fascinating guy. And the other thing we can do with that, by the way, is that I have a 10-minute chat with Jahan. It's great. And we do it, maybe we would have used 2 minutes on Fox. What we do is we post the whole thing on YouTube, and then we take 45 seconds and put it on the show and say, if you want the whole thing, go online and watch it at your own. So there's all, by the way, I didn't know any of this when we started last year. I thought I knew everything. You might think I would from the way I dressed, but I didn't know anything. I was I was complaining, but I didn't know what I was talking about. What it actually turns out was by trying this stuff, I've learned all these lessons.
We got 15 minutes to go, so any questions from the floor? Yes, in the front here.
Tim, going back to what you were asking about starting in the West, we live in a bit of a nanny world these days. Our own safety is in other people's hands, it seems. Thank you.
That wasn't necessary, but anyway.
It probably isn't necessary, but so yeah, I agree. The race should have started on time. We don't really know why it didn't, and a lot of the drivers said they would raise it in the drivers' briefing. We probably won't learn the outcome of that briefing either. Tangential to that is Lewis talking about wearing jewelry, and that should be, his prerogative, and his safety is at stake, and that should be his decision to make. With all of this, how influential are the drivers these days when it comes to their own safety?
It's a really good point you're making, Zach. So Alex on the show, when we were talking with the whole jewelry, they call it pants and piercings, which tells you everything you need to know. People refer to this as pants and piercings. This is not, it's not ideal. Alex Young, who used to be a Grand Prix driver, we covered that before, he said, if there's a fire and it's reaching your
Business end.
that area, you've got bigger problems than what underwear you're wearing. And I think he's right. And I think I heard Martin Brundle say, by the time a guy gets into a racing car, he or she has made the risk adjustments, the risk assessments, and if that person wants to have, and it's mostly about Lewis, if he wants to wear a nose piercing, he's made that decision. So if he wears a nose piercing, and particularly now, I think signing a waiver, totally right, because it might cause a problem. I think the biggest problem with this is, actually, to your point, there's too much of this nonsense, but actually the biggest problem is they got it wrong in Abu Dhabi in mid-December of 2021. And you're telling me that this stuff is not related to that. And people say, bullshit. Now, it might not be. It might be somebody saying, if we're going to apply the rules, we should apply the rules. But unfortunately, it's just tone deaf to talk about jewelry when the most famous racing driver of all time happens to wear lots of jewelry. Yeah, Pierre Gasly wears a cross as well, but it's not about Pierre, is it?
No.
Right? So I think that's the problem with this. And again, going back to my earlier analogy, you kind of lose faith in the CEO of a company when he says daft things. And that, to me, this was daft.
Bill.
Sure, I've got two questions.
You only get one.
I've got one that'll put you on the spot, and I've got one that's something probably you're interested in answering. So I'll give you the one that you're interested in answering.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Monaco, I mean, it was a crap race, I mean, the circuit.
No, I don't agree.
I think the circuit, it's impossible for these cars to pass on, right? And we've all been in Macau. I think they could probably hear me without this. We've all been in Macau, and Macau, except for the past 2 years because of COVID, Macau can put on some brilliant races, right? So what do you do about Monaco? If Monaco were a golf course, you wouldn't stage the PGA Championship there anymore.
Yeah, okay. So my personal opinion is I actually really enjoyed the race. And I enjoyed it putting aside the 1 hour wait, right? And I enjoyed it. Well, first of all, who else enjoyed it? Who didn't? Come on. Okay, that was the Prix, and now let me explain why I think you enjoyed it. Because I think that what makes things exciting is not always the actual action, it's the anticipation of action, right? And it's what might happen. That's why you turn the TV on in the first place, really. It's like, what might happen today, this evening? And I think that Monaco is one of those events, and I'm talking about just the Grand Prix itself on the Sunday to start with, where we had the really difficult track conditions. I mean, there was obviously Mick Schumacher got it wrong, but Carlos Sainz caught a couple of unbelievable slides, and that would have been the car destroyed. And those last 5 or 10 minutes when there was 4 of them in a train together, that was really close. I thought that was what I was anticipating might happen, and we were just waiting. Will he? Won't he? No, he didn't actually, but it was the anticipation. The other thing about Monaco, I think, And we could, this list of reasons why Monaco, I mean, no one likes a cocky kid, right? And Monaco's the cocky kid on the F1 calendar. You know, they need to get over themselves with the owning all the commercial rights and crappy TV directors directing. They need to really get over that. Putting that to a side, I think it's nice to have a world championship of different events. And when you know you go to Monaco knowing the best time to be at Monaco is Saturday. Because qualifying on Saturday is really, really exciting because you kind of know that that's, in most cases, unless you're Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, you've kind of got the job half done. That's unfair. I shouldn't have done that, but I did. And that's so. I think it was. I thought it was great. Next question.
At the front here.
Given most teams have always been very defensive of their drivers, you know, protective of them on and off the circuit, what's your thoughts on Zach Brown's comments on Danny Ricciardo? So
you know I used to work for Zach.
I didn't.
Yeah, I worked for Zach for 7 years, 8 years. I'm actually only 24, but and I'm a massive fan of his. I mean, I might have done, but I didn't. You know, I learned so much from Zach. And one of the things I learned about Zach was nothing happens by accident. Whilst he's the jovial guy and he's funny and he's good on camera, he's extremely hardworking. I mean, he's the perfect example of, wow, what does he do? Just works. Not just. He works really, really hard. Surrounds himself with really good people, both above and around. He just connects himself to really smart, powerful people, and so on. And as a perfect example of this was when we had COVID in Melbourne. You know, I was there with Fox. One member of the McLaren team was COVID positive. McLaren issues a press release almost immediately saying we're withdrawing from the Grand Prix. That decision wasn't made on that Thursday. That decision was made, I don't know, but actually I do know. It was made at least a week before in a cold air-conditioned room in Woking, scenario planning, because that's the kind of guy he is. And so actually what I did was, knowing that, was I got the hell out of Melbourne because I thought the Grand Prix is not going to happen because he's made the risk assessment in the cold and analytic way. And what I don't want to do is be stuck in a hotel room in Melbourne with the whole, you know, the potential COVID lockdown. So it's my way of saying I was a little bit surprised that that comment came out of his mouth. And then I thought, Is that an answer? Yeah.
He's got an agenda. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Question about Ferrari. I loved particularly one part of your last show, talking about the entrepreneurialism of...
Sorry, can you say that again? You loved what?
Part of your show, yes. Go that one, yes.
See? See? That's what I'm expecting when I come here.
The part that I loved was about your analogy to entrepreneurialism of some teams that, you know, just are more freewheeling and they don't have this analysis paralysis that Ferrari seems to clearly have painted themselves into a corner. What do you think is wrong these days, comparing to the days of Schumacher, Jean Todt, Ross Brawn, and Montezemolo, who, if anybody was afraid of somebody, was Montezemolo at Ferrari, right? Like, that's why Ferrari worked. It was management by fear, and that typically freezes people up. What do you think is wrong these days, and how do you fix that compared to the old days when Ferrari was winning everything?
Gosh. There were two thoughts in my head as you were asking that question. And the first thing was to repeat that you said one of the many things that you liked about the Go F1 show, which I thought was the great comment after that. No, there were two things. One was, I'm not sure there is much wrong with Ferrari. I think they've got a really good car, probably the best car, at least equal best, which is not, you know, that's impressive. And they've also, and they, you know, because Ferrari's got everything in-house, doesn't necessarily mean they've got more resources than, say, Mercedes or Red Bull now, right? So I think they're doing a really good job. I think the management structure mostly is really good. From what, you know, Matteo Binotto, I think, is a really calm, I think he's being given the air cover by the company and so on. Then you made the Michael Schumacher question, and I think there's a couple of points there. I think one is that Michael came into Ferrari as a double world champion, so he already knows what to do, and Charles Leclerc doesn't have that, does he? And so Michael had made his mistakes early on, in a sense. You know, so he arrived as double world champion. So basically, if Michael says it, let's do it, because we haven't won a championship since '79, and he won his last one in '95. So let's follow him, shall we? And Charles doesn't have that, and Charles still makes little doesn't he? Occasionally makes these mistakes, which can be forgiven, but that's not great.
But Ferrari's glory years have always been with a really dominant driver. You had the Schumacher era, and again, Lauda turned it around in the 70s. Are the current pairing, have they got the strength of character? They certainly haven't got the experience, the strength of character to actually do that, to impose their will on the team like those two guys did beforehand.
There's two parts to that. One is that, in a sense, they've got a slight problem, which is Carlos might be a little bit too good. And I think there's a little bit of friction inside the team. Not friction, but there's a little bit too much competitiveness maybe inside the team. I don't think it's what you're referring to. There is another point that I'm walking towards gently, because I think most of us are massive fans of the Italian culture, and you don't get what Ferrari is without that. But to your point about the Schumacher years, Germanic guy, surrounded by a really international team of people. And I just wonder whether sometimes if the culture's too much of a monoculture, that maybe that's a problem. When it comes to really those fine margins, maybe, I don't know.
We got time. Yes, Joel.
Thank you. Just one very simple question. What about Mick? Do you think he's there because of his last name or because he has a talent?
What do you think? Yeah, I think there's, it's a really interesting question. But I think he is there because of his last name. Because I don't think that he would have necessarily got there without some kind of commercial advantage, whether it was, because, he won the Formula 3 championship, he won the Formula 2 championship, so he's done those. In the same way that Lance Stroll won his championships when he came through. I don't think he didn't do Formula 2, did he? But he won Formula 3 and Formula 4. So, champion, and you don't get to be a champion, as I know, Tim. You don't get to be a champion without beating some people, right? There's something to that, right? In my case, obviously not very many people, but that's a different story. But I don't think he would have made it into Formula 1 had he not had a commercial advantage, which in this case came from being a Schumacher name. In the era we have now, where thankfully people don't get hurt and they can stay in their jobs a long time. Having said that, the other side of Mick, as you know, is that generally in his second year, he goes from being, generally not crashing, to some now winning races and doing well. And we've seen that this year, actually, haven't we? With him being, when he's not crashing, he's pretty close to Kevin and looking pretty good. So, he's crashing a lot, and that's not good. But, so to answer your question, yes, because he's Schumacher, but I'm kind of hopeful because it'd be really cool, and he's a really, interesting person. I think it'd be cool if he can make it. I don't think he will, but it'd be nice if he did.
Okay, well, that's pretty much us out of time. Matthew, as always, few controversial views, which no doubt will get aired around the world, and you'll come in for a good basting from most people. But thanks very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Always enjoy basting.
Yeah. And as ever, nobody leaves the FCC
Brilliant.
without something, and I think it is actually what you always ask for.
Thank you very much.
Matthew Marsh, thank you very much.
Bottle of gin. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you back here again in the not too distant future. Thanks again.
Thank you.